The man following her had been getting closer for 3 blocks. She had maybe 30 seconds before he reached her. The club was crowded, chandelier light, designer suits, the particular hum of Seoul money at rest, and none of it was going to help her. So she did the only thing she could think of. She walked straight toward the most dangerous-looking man in the room, rose onto her toes, pressed her lips close to his ear, and whispered words that would change both their lives. "Please, just pretend you know me." He went completely still. Then his hand found the small of her back, and it never really left. Welcome to Black in Korea Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The night started the way most disasters do, with a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. Ngozi Ez had not come to Club Obsidian to find trouble. She'd come because Park Sung-jin had been following her for 3 weeks, and her friend Yemi had finally convinced her that being surrounded by people was safer than hiding alone in her studio apartment in Mapogu, while someone with too much money and no conscience decided she belonged to him. The first week it had been flowers outside her door. The second week, photographs, her leaving the gallery, her at the Pajangmacha near her residency building, her on the Han River path on a Tuesday morning when she'd believed she was alone. The third week, a single white glove left on her welcome mat, folded with a neatness that made her stomach turn in a way she couldn't entirely explain and didn't entirely need to. She'd called the police. They'd been thorough and polite and ultimately insufficient. "Come out," Yemi had said. "Too many witnesses. Too many cameras. He can't touch you in a place like Club Obsidian." And then, because Yemi knew her, "You need to breathe, Ngozi. You're disappearing into that studio and it's making everything worse." Believed her. She'd been wrong. She spotted Park Sung-jin 40 seconds after stepping through the second-floor entrance. Her body registered him before her brain caught up. That cold animal flash of recognition that bypasses reasoning entirely. He was near the bar. He was already looking at her. Already smiling with a mouth that had no warmth in it whatsoever. She turned away before their eyes could fully meet. She walked, not ran, because running would hand him everything in the opposite direction, moving through the crowd with the controlled urgency of someone who cannot afford to look like they're panicking. She was searching for a face she recognized, an exit that wasn't the one he was blocking, anything that could function as a shield for the next 60 seconds while she figured out her next move. What she found was Han Seung-jun. She hadn't known his name then. She'd known only that he occupied the room differently from everyone else in it, not performing ease the way wealthy people perform ease, not working the crowd, not calculating who to be seen with. He stood near the far wall like something the room had arranged itself around without his participation, tall and still in a charcoal suit, dark eyes moving across the space with the patient, deliberate attention of someone who isn't watching the party. He was cataloging it, every exit, every face, every shift in the current of the crowd. He was alone, but the space around him wasn't. 2 men stood near a pillar to his left, close enough to reach, far enough to grant the illusion of solitude. They didn't look at the party. They looked at the room. There was a difference, and Ngozi's instincts processed it in the half-second she had available. Whoever this man was, no one approached him uninvited. No one questioned his presence. No one in this entire gilded room was going to step into his orbit without permission, which meant no one was going to step into hers if she was standing inside it. She had 30 seconds. She moved. Later, she would not be able to fully account for the crossing of that marble floor. Heels clicking, heart slamming against her ribs, the soft gold of her dress catching the light. She was aware of the 2 men near the pillar going very still. She was aware of the man himself tracking her approach, not with alarm, not with confusion, but with that quality of absolute attention shifting to focus entirely on her, like a lens correcting. She stopped in front of him, close enough to have to tilt her face upward, close enough to catch the ghost of his cologne, cedar, something darker underneath, something that had no business making her breath complicated in a moment like this one. She had perhaps a second before he spoke. She rose onto her toes. She brought her lips to the curve of his ear, not touching, just close enough that her breath would reach him, and she whispered, "Please, just pretend you know me." Silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. His hand moved before his mind gave the instruction. She'd believe this later, when she knew him well enough to understand how rarely his body acted without his mind's authorization. It came to rest at the small of her back, warm and certain and completely unhesitating, the way you touch someone you've touched 1,000 times before. Park Sung-jin arrived 4 seconds later. Han SSI. His bow was the correct depth, not because he wanted to perform it, but because the alternative was unthinkable. His smile had changed, still present, but recalculated. His eyes moved to Ngozi and back to Seungjun with the quick, assessing flicker of a man doing math he doesn't like the answer to. Sungjin. Seungjun's voice was pleasant, completely, utterly empty of warmth. I didn't realize you were here tonight. I didn't realize you knew. She was just telling me she'd run into you. The hand at the small of her back was still, certain. I'm glad it gives me the chance to say this in person. A pause, not hesitation, the kind of pause that's placed deliberately that becomes something with weight. Don't come near her again. Silence that settled over that corner of the room made the surrounding conversations quiet themselves without anyone deciding to do so. Park Sungjin's jaw moved. His calculation ran its course. Of course, he said. Apologies for any misunderstanding. He left, not slowly, not with the performance of a man who leaves on his own terms. He simply left, and the speed of it, the completeness, told Ngozi something about the man beside her that 3 seconds of assessment hadn't fully conveyed. She hadn't just found a shield. She'd found the only shield in Seoul that could make that particular threat fold and walk away without another word she needed to say something. Thank him, excuse herself, create distance before this went further than a social fiction she'd invented out of desperation. Instead, who are you? He looked down at her. Something happened in his expression, not softening exactly. More like the quality of his stillness changed. Like a room that's already quiet becomes somehow more so. Someone who apparently knows you, he said. She felt the sound of it in her sternum. Dry and steady, carrying the ghost of something she'd have sworn wasn't amusement, except that it was. Sorry, she said, and meant it. I shouldn't have, it was a desperate moment. You can go back to whatever you were doing. Stay, he said, not a question. Not quite a command, the precise space between them, and it made her breath catch. My meeting is finished, he added, which she'd discover much later was a lie. One of his men received a message within minutes and sent a return that read he's occupied. Whoever Lee Myung-ho was, he waited. You look like you haven't eaten. She hadn't. She'd been too anxious to eat since morning, and she had no idea why she told him that. She told him that. He said nothing. He simply turned toward a table that had been empty all evening. Conspicuously, deliberately empty. The way tables stay empty when everyone in the room understands that sitting within 12 feet of a particular person requires an invitation, and held out his hand. His name, she learned, was Han Seungjun. He said it without ceremony, without the careful social spin she'd later understand most people applied when introducing themselves to him. He asked her name and repeated it once, Ngozi, with the attention of someone who wants to say it correctly and considers this non-negotiable. He asked her profession. She told him she was a textile artist, that she'd come to Seoul on a fellowship 18 months ago and stayed because a gallery in Insadong had offered a residency, that she was completing a collection for a March exhibition. He listened the way people who are actually listening listen, not assembling his response while she talked, but taking in what she was saying. He did not ask about Park Sungjin. She was grateful and somehow also unsettled by the restraint. He ordered food without asking what she wanted. But he ordered correctly. She'd find out later he'd asked the server 2 precise questions about sourcing and made a decision based on the answers. When the plates arrived, she had to make a conscious effort not to eat the way anxiety makes you eat. Not going to ask, she finally said. No, not. He turned his glass once slowly. Because you'll either tell me or you won't, and if you don't, it means it's not my business. She stared at him. 18 months in Seoul, she had not met a single person who operated this way. That's very reasonable. You say that like it surprised you. Who do what you just did usually want something in return. His eyes lifted to hers. Dark direct, with that quality of total attention she was starting to understand was simply him, not a performance, not an intimidation tactic, just the way he was oriented toward the world. What do you think I did? He asked, scared him away. Permanently. She held his gaze. That kind of scared, where he's not going to recalculate and try again. That's an accurate read. Which means you have a specific kind of power over him. She paused. Who are you really? The silence stretched. 20 floors below, Seoul moved through its evening, indifferent and bright. Someone who can ensure Park Sungjin never comes within 50 meters of you again, he said. That's what matters tonight. An answer. She recognized it as the kind of non-answer a man gives when the real answer would require more honesty than one evening can hold. She should have left then. She stayed for another hour. The conversation moved, his favorite district in Seoul, her first winter along the Han River. A single question about her work that was so precisely observant she found herself explaining the entire thematic spine of her March collection before she'd registered what was happening. When she stood to leave, he stood also. She'd learned this was not something Han Seung-jun typically did. "Gallery," he said. In Insadong. What's it called?" she told him. Watch something cross his face, the briefest, most controlled version of a man filing information as something he intends to use. She went home in a black car with a driver who said nothing, and delivered her to her building with an efficiency that felt like something she'd commissioned rather than received. In the elevator, she pressed her palm flat against her sternum, where something was still happening she didn't entirely have words for. She needed to find words for it. Because letting it continue unnamed was exactly how things became dangerous 3 days of silence. Then a package at the gallery, dark paper. No bow. Inside, a book she'd mentioned offhandedly, a collection of essays on West African kente weaving traditions and their influence on contemporary textile art, out of print, genuinely difficult to source. The kind of thing requiring both the knowledge of where to look and the motivation to actually look. No note. None was necessary. She sat with it in the storage room surrounded by half-finished work and the smell of linen, and she understood 2 things simultaneously. Han Seung-jun had not been at Club Obsidian by coincidence, and he had given her 3 days of silence after no calls, no appearances, no pressure. The book wasn't a demand. It was a door, left open. Hers to walk through or not. She texted Yemi a photo of it. Yemi's response was 17 exclamation points and a 4-minute voice note containing the phrase Ngozi as, "You better not be standing in that back room overthinking this exactly twice." Ngozi laughed full and genuine, coming up from somewhere that had been quiet for a while. She put the book in her bag. She didn't contact Han Seung-jun. Not yet what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, sitting in that black car with her palm pressed to her sternum, was that 20 floors above her, Han Seung-jun had remained standing for several seconds after she disappeared through the elevator doors. His 2 men, Kim and Jeong, exchanged exactly one glance. It said, "This is new." It also said, "Don't mention it." Both were 9-year veterans of his employ, and they had never, in those 9 years, seen him stand after someone left a room. He sat back down eventually. He had 3 calls to make. He made them with the precise efficiency that governed everything he did. Han Seung-jun, at 34, ran the largest and most deeply embedded criminal network in the Seoul metropolitan area with the kind of operational discipline that had kept him alive, free, and feared for over a decade. He'd rebuilt it from the bones of what his father had broken, rebuilt it differently, smarter, with legitimate holdings that were real and profitable, and employed hundreds of people who had no idea who their ultimate employer was. Hotels, logistics, construction. And then the other things. Import and export of certain goods that never appeared on manifests. Protection arrangements with business owners who understood the alternative was worse. A financing arm serving people the banks wouldn't touch at rates not discussed in polite company. He was not a good man. He'd never had the luxury of being one. But he'd drawn lines. Kept them. Spent 11 years maintaining the kind of control that kept those lines in place, and that control had cost him nearly everything that could be described as personal, warm, or human. He placed his 3rd call, put his phone away. Thought about a woman in a gold dress who'd made a desperate decision and executed it without flinching, Ngozi. He said it once, quietly testing it. The syllables were unfamiliar and precise and satisfying in a way he couldn't account for. He thought about the way she'd assessed him, not with fear, not with the calculating interest of people who wanted something from him, but with genuine, unsentimental curiosity. She'd asked, "Who are you really?" and she'd meant it. She actually wanted to know. No one actually wanted to know. Or they thought they did, until the truth began taking shape. He ordered a car. Went home. Stood at the floor-to-ceiling window looking at souls spreading in every direction, and let himself, for exactly as long as it took to pour 2 fingers of whiskey and drink it, think about something that wasn't business. Then he pulled up the evening's operational reports and worked until 3 in the morning. The book arrived at the Insadong gallery at 10 the following morning. He'd been awake when the order was placed. The invitation came 11 days after the book, and it came from an unexpected direction. Not from Ngozi. From Yemi, who had somehow, through Instagram DMs and a mutual acquaintance from an art opening, she'd explain later with the innocence of someone who genuinely didn't understand why this was remarkable, obtained a contact number for someone in Han Seung-jun's orbit, and used it to communicate that Ngozi's exhibition preview was in 2 weeks, and there would be space on the invite list. The invitation was accepted. Ngozi found out the night before the preview when gallery owner Minjai told her with barely contained delight that Han Seung-jun's office had RSVP'd. She spent that night in the studio, not sleeping, finishing 2 pieces she'd been stuck on for a week. Her body's response to feeling something, creation as the only place to put energy with nowhere else to go. The preview was on a Thursday in February, cold enough outside to sting. Inside, warm and lit the way Ngozi had spent 3 weeks negotiating with Minjai, softer than a commercial space, designed to make the textiles glow. And they glowed. 6 large-scale woven pieces hanging from the ceiling of the main room, each one a conversation between Nigerian ad-air traditions and Korean pajagi textile techniques. Indigo blue and celadon, West African geometric precision, and the Korean practice of making beauty from remnants. The work of 2 years and an entire life of watching the world refuse to let things belong to each other. She was standing near the 3rd piece when the room's energy shifted. She didn't look immediately. She'd told herself she wouldn't. She looked anyway. Han Seung-jun came in wearing a dark coat over an equally dark suit, and he looked at the space the way he'd looked at Club Obsidian cataloging. But within 2 seconds the cataloging stopped. His eyes found the nearest textile. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, not in any way the room could point to, but she was watching and she saw it. He was genuinely looking. He made his way around the room in a direction that brought him eventually to her. He stopped in front of the piece she stood nearest, the largest, the one she called Hall, and said, without greeting, without preamble, "The blue in the lower quadrant, the saturation is different." She stared at him. "It's fermented indigo." Nigerian clay resist process, fermentation reduced, then overdyed with Korean natural indigo extract. A pause. "How did you know the blue wasn't standard?" He looked at her then. The quality of his stillness had deepened since the club, like 11 days had done something to it. "I had a textile collection as a child. Scraps of fabric my mother kept in a box. I used to study them." It was the most personal thing he'd offered her. She understood this without being told. "Show me the others," she said. She did. And he followed and listened, and asked 3 questions across 90 minutes that were better than most questions she'd received in 2 years of artist talks. Not because they were sophisticated, but because they were specific. He wanted to understand the actual process. He asked like someone for whom the truth of things mattered more than the appearance of knowing. When the preview wound down and the last guests drifted toward the door, he remained. "One called Hall," he said, when it was just the 2 of them. "I'd like to commission a companion piece. That would take 8 months minimum." "I know," she considered him. "Why that piece?" He looked at Hall once more. "Because it's about 2 things that weren't supposed to fit together, figuring out how to hold each other." Gallery was very quiet. Something in Ngozi's chest shifted. Tectonic. Small in scale, enormous in implication. "Need a deposit," she said. His mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough that she'd learned to watch for it. "I'll have my office contact you." He left. Minjai emerged from the back 4 seconds later with an expression of pure, barely contained ecstasy. Ngozi stood in the warm light of her exhibition and pressed her hand to her sternum, exactly where she'd pressed it 11 days ago. The thing that lived there now had a shape. She didn't name it, but she felt its outline definite and alarming, like discovering a piece of furniture in a familiar dark room. Outside, it had started to snow. The deposit arrived the next morning, triple what she would have asked for. With it, on ivory card stock in his assistant's precise hand, a reservation at Yungsik, a time, and at the bottom, in different handwriting, slightly uneven, pressed with more force than necessary, 2 words, "If you want." She called Yemi and read her the card. 4 seconds of loaded silence. Then, "Ngozi, the man handwrote 'if you want.' He is asking." Could be doing that because it's tactically effective. Girl. Men like him. You don't know what kind of man he is. She didn't. That was the problem. She went anyway. Yungsik on a Thursday evening in February was warm and softly lit, containing the kind of quiet that expensive restaurants achieve when they've stopped needing to impress anyone. He was already there when she arrived. She'd been 2 minutes early, which was her version of defensive punctuality, and he'd been earlier. He stood when she approached the table. The gesture was so instinctive, so entirely without performance that she almost missed it. "You came," he said. "You gave me the choice." Something in his expression settled, like a tension released. "I did." What she hadn't anticipated about Han Seung-jun and couldn't defend against was that he was real in a way that most people in her orbit were not. He didn't perform ease or warmth. He had neither in abundance and didn't try to manufacture them. What he had instead was an absolute, unsettling honesty of attention. When he was in a conversation, he was entirely inside it. He asked about Nigeria. Not surface questions, not do you miss it, but specific questions that told her he'd looked things up and cared about accuracy. She found herself describing her grandmother's hands, the way they moved over cloth, and she'd told no one in Seoul about those hands. No one, and yet here they were, released without her fully deciding to release them. He listened without offering advice or comparison. He just let her words exist between them. In return, he offered very little of himself. She noticed and filed it rather than pressing. He mentioned the hotel group once Seoul, Busan, Jeju, one under construction in Incheon. He mentioned, with the flatness people use when a sentence is true but incomplete, that his business was complex and he preferred not to discuss it in detail. She met his eyes when he said this. "That's fair," she said. "People don't owe strangers their complicated parts on a first dinner." "That what this is? A first dinner? What would you call it?" He turned his glass, one slow rotation. "A beginning." She looked at her plate. Not from shyness, she wasn't shy, but because the word had landed with weight she needed a moment to organize around. "That's a lot of confidence," she said. "It's not confidence," quietly. "It's hope." Confession was so undefended that she almost missed it. When it landed, she looked up, and his expression was that of a man who has said something true and is waiting to see what happens to it in the open air. She decided, in that moment, that whatever Han Seung-jun was, and she was increasingly certain he was something that would be complicated to name. He was not performing this. She stayed through dessert and tea and the gentle moment when the restaurant began to empty around them. He drove her home himself this time, a silver car, quiet as water, navigated through Seoul with the same ease he brought to everything. In front of her building, he stopped but didn't cut the engine. She read this correctly. He was keeping the exit clean. She was halfway out of the door when she stopped. "Han Seung-jun," he turned. "When you put your hand on my back at the club," she said. "You'd never touched me before. You did it like you'd done it 100 times. His jaw moved. "Barely." "I know." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you needed it to look real, and I wanted it to be." She stood in the cold for a second with that. Then she went inside it became a thing. That was the only way she could describe it to Yemi. It became a thing, with no clear edges or announced beginning, growing in the space between text messages and Tuesday lunches, and the 3 times in the following 2 weeks that she looked up from her work in the gallery's back studio, and found him there, having let himself in through a side door whose lock apparently didn't challenge his resources. "You have to stop breaking into my studio," she told him the 3rd time, not turning around because she'd learned to feel him before she saw him. Door was unlocked. Seung-jun, Ngozi. The way he said her name had become a problem. It was the way someone says a word they've practiced privately with the care of someone who knows its value. He brought food sometimes, never flowers. She noticed and wondered if he'd intuited that a woman who spent her days surrounded by beauty in her own studio didn't require additional beauty imported from outside. He brought lunch from places she'd mentioned once, offhandedly. The Pajang Matcha her residency advisor had recommended in her first week, a Nigerian restaurant in Itaewon that served jollof rice close enough to her mother's recipe to make her eyes sting the first time she ate it. "This is a tactic," she told him one afternoon over the Itaewon rice. "You're doing things specifically calibrated to work on me." He said. She blinked. She'd expected deflection. "You're not going to deny it." "I want you to want to know me. I'm making that as easy as I can. If I decide I don't, then you don't." He met her eyes. "I'd prefer you did, but I won't make it the only option." She pushed rice around her container. "Most men with your kind of power don't usually give women options." "I know what that looks like," he said, and underneath the words something old and heavy moved. "I know what it produces." She didn't push further, but she heard it, the way certain sentences sit differently when they're coming from somewhere personal. She filed it, added it to the growing and increasingly complex picture of Han Seung-jun. What she was beginning to suspect, and working, with moderate success, to resist confirming, was that this powerful, controlled, precisely constructed man was in the process of becoming undone by her in a way he had not been undone by anything before. She could see it in small things. The way his expression would catch when she laughed, not just change, but catch, like a man hearing a sound he didn't know existed and wanting to hear it again. The way he sat slightly closer than strictly conversational, always with the careful, continuous proximity of someone who doesn't trust distance. The texts she'd received that were by any reasonable analysis unnecessary, no information conveyed, no logistics served. Just contact, just the fact of reaching. She was falling. She could feel it the way you feel the beginning of a fall, not the ground yet, but the absence of it beneath you. The first crack appeared on a Saturday, 3 weeks after their first dinner. A man she didn't recognize was waiting outside the gallery when she arrived. Young, well-dressed, with the quality of attention of someone who has been specifically waiting for her. My name is Choi. My employer would like to make an offer on several pieces from your upcoming exhibition. He held out an envelope. Private sale. The number inside is an opening offer, not a ceiling. Acquisition letterhead read, Min Chialsu. The number inside was nearly triple asking price. She called Han Seung-jun on her way into the gallery. Chialsu, she said when he answered. Do you know that name? The silence on his end was exactly 1 second longer than it should have been. Where did you hear that name? She explained. Another silence, qualitatively different. She was already learning to distinguish his silences the way you learn to distinguish weather systems. This one had the density of someone recalibrating. Sell to him, he said. Why? Ngozi. That's not an answer, Han Seung-jun. A beat. He's not someone who collects art because he values it. He's connected to Park Sung-jin's social circle. This is information gathering. She sat down. Her legs were suddenly unreliable. Someone from Park Sung-jin's circle is coming after me through my work. Handling it. That is deeply unsatisfying. I know. And he did know she could hear it. He wanted to give her more. The fact that he wasn't was not arrogance. It was something else. Something carrying the same weight as that sentence about knowing what power produces. Trust me for 24 hours. After that, if you need more information, I'll give it to you. She almost said that's not how trust works. Instead, 24 hours, and then we have a conversation. He said. We do. He arrived at her apartment that evening. She hadn't asked him to. He stood in her doorway with his coat still on and the expression of a man deciding how much of himself to make visible. Sung-jin has been sending people to ask about you, he said, without preamble once she'd stepped back to let him in. Asking your neighbors about your routine, asking gallery staff about your schedule. This started 5 weeks before Club Obsidian. Her kitchen suddenly felt very small. How long have you known? The full picture since this morning. I had people look into the timeline after Min Chialsu's man appeared. He paused. He has a pattern with women. A particular kind of interest he pursues regardless of the woman's response. She understood what he was not quite saying. Her chest tightened. Other women, he continued, in the past 4 years. Reported harassment that went nowhere, cases quietly redirected, evidence that went missing. A legal system that's easier to navigate if your family has been donating to it for 3 generations. She leaned against her kitchen counter and breathed through it. This was fear, not the sharp, sudden kind from Club Obsidian, but the slow, cold variety that settles in and starts measuring how much space it can take. Han Seung-jun was watching her. He hadn't moved from just inside the doorway. Hadn't pressed into the space, just there, available, waiting for whatever she needed. You should have told me sooner, she said. Yes. The lack of information doesn't protect me. It removes my ability to make decisions. He held her gaze. You're right. I didn't want to frighten you before I had something concrete to offer. That was a pause, not a comfortable one. That was my decision to make, and it wasn't. She looked at him across her kitchen. This man who ran whatever it was he ran, standing in her apartment with his coat on and his jaw tight, and the expression of someone doing the complicated work of learning how to tell the truth to a person he cares about. Down, she said. I'm making tea. And then you're going to tell me everything you know about Park Sung-jin, what you've done, and what might still be coming. And then I'm going to decide what I do about it. Not you, me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took off his coat. They talked for 3 hours. The kind of talking that carries a cost. He told her the full shape of Park Sung-jin's background, the family money that had insulated him from every consequence across 32 years, the 2 women whose cases had been redirected. She told him about the flowers, the photographs, the white glove. He listened to the white glove detail with an absolutely still face that was, she understood, his version of controlled fury. "I have people who can be near the building," he said when she finished. "Visible or not, your choice. This is your home." "Visible," she said immediately. "I want to know they're there." He nodded. No phone. She'd learned that his people operated on a system where certain words spoken certain ways produced outcomes without additional instruction. A man would appear in her lobby the next morning reading a newspaper, and she'd understand. Around midnight, the tea long cold, the conversation drifted from Park Sung-jin to other things. The way conversations do when they've done the hard work and need somewhere to breathe. She talked about her first year in Seoul, the language barrier, the particular loneliness of being the only black woman in most rooms she entered, how she'd channeled all of it into the work until the work became something she was genuinely proud of. He told her, and she felt the weight of the offering, that he had been largely alone for 11 years, that his world didn't allow for the kind of company he might otherwise have wanted. What kind of company? Very quietly, he looked at his hands. Honest company, people who say what they mean and mean what they say. You think I'm that? His eyes came up to hers. I think you're the first person in a very long time who didn't calculate what to say to me before saying it. Apartment was quiet, cold outside, the city light coming through the window in pale yellow fragments, something charged in the air between them, not heavy. Electric. She was aware of the distance between them on the couch decreasing without either of them making a deliberate move. The way tides work, the way gravity works, he said her name, very quietly, just that. She looked at him. His hand came up slowly, giving her every fraction of a second to make a different choice, and his thumb brushed along the edge of her jaw. Not claiming, asking. Ngozi, he said again. Like the word was something he'd been carrying at a cost, she made the decision. Her hand came up and covered his, and she tilted her face toward him, his eyes closed, just for a moment. The expression of a man allowing himself something he's been rationing. When they opened, what was in them was something raw and unguarded. Not the stillness, not the control, but something beneath both, rewriting everything she'd assumed about what he was capable of. He kissed her like it mattered. Like precision and desperation had found the exact point where they met. Soft where she hadn't expected soft, certain where she'd feared uncertainty. Her hands found the lapels of his shirt. She'd had reasons to resist this. She still had them. They were filed somewhere, waiting for her to need them again. Later, she thought. She'd need them. Turned out to be morning. She woke before him, a fact that would have seemed impossible for the Han Seung-jun she'd observed, for whom vulnerability during unconsciousness seemed like an active risk. But he was asleep in the gray Seoul morning, and without the controlled precision of his waking face, he looked younger. Not young, the weight of whatever he carried didn't entirely vacate in sleep, but younger. Something released in him that was usually held. She got up, made coffee, stood at the window with her hands wrapped around the mug. The Park Sung-jin problem existed. The Han Seung-jun run something serious and illegal problem existed. She hadn't confirmed it explicitly, but the architecture of their conversations made it unavoidable as a hypothesis, and she was not the kind of woman who ignored her own reasoning. She'd come to Seoul on her own, built something real. She would not let it be dismantled by willful blindness. Behind her, after a while, she heard him stir. She turned. He was sitting up, and the moment their eyes met, she saw him register where he was, register her expression, register the careful distance between her position at the window and his position in the room. You're thinking, he said. I'm always thinking. About me specifically. He stood, straightened his shirt with the same precision he brought to everything. And about the things you don't know. There are things I don't know, she said. And things I do know that I've been carefully not saying out loud. I need to say them. Not to put you on trial, but because I need to know you can hear them. He held her gaze. Tell me. Whatever you run, the hotels are real. The legitimate business is real, and so is the other thing. I don't know its exact shape, but I know it's there. I know people like Park Sung-jin defer to you not because of your hotel group. I know whatever you did to discourage him didn't happen through legal channels. She paused. I'm not asking you to justify it. I'm asking if you can be honest with me about it, because I cannot be with someone who keeps me in comfortable ignorance. I'd rather have the terrifying truth than the comfortable lie. Silence stretched. Yes, he said, I can be honest with you, even when it's ugly, especially then. He crossed the room, not rushing, not carefully, just moving toward her with the directness of someone who has made a decision. He stopped close. I have never offered that to anyone. I'm offering it to you. Her coffee was getting cold. Her chest was doing the tectonic thing. "'Kay," she said. "Then we figure it out." Something in his face shifted, that barely there relief that with him qualified as profound emotional disclosure. "'Kay." He said what nobody tells you about choosing the terrifying truth over the comfortable lie, is that the truth, once offered, has a way of expanding to fill all available space. Han Seung-jun began to be honest with her, slowly, the way of someone dismantling a dam they spent years constructing, careful that the water doesn't arrive all at once and become a flood. He told her the organization had approximately 300 people in its direct employ across Seoul, that it operated across import and export, private financing, and what he described with careful precision as facilitation services, things existing in the gray areas between legal and illegal. He told her his father had been the kind of man who used power the way certain men used fists, indiscriminately, without distinction between what deserved it and what didn't, and that Han Seung-jun had rebuilt everything after his father's death 11 years ago around a different set of principles. Principles, she repeated carefully. Rules, he amended. I don't deal in people. I don't deal in anything that produces victims without recourse. The men who work for me know the boundaries. The ones who have tested them no longer work for me, she sat with that. The fact that you can make someone like Park Sung-jin simply stop, without legal process, without consequences for you, that's a level of power that terrifies me. I know. It should terrify you too. He looked at her steadily. It does, every day. She believed him. That kept coming back, she believed him. Not naively, not because she wanted to, but because Han Seung-jun's honesty was a specific, costly, identifiable thing she'd learned to recognize. He didn't tell her comfortable things. He told her accurate things. I'm not at peace with it, she said. I need you to know that. I won't pretend that what you do is fine because I have complicated feelings about you. Don't want you to pretend. I'm also not going to make the decision to leave based on a moral position that requires me to ignore everything I've actually seen you be. She looked at him. You are two things at once. I'm trying to hold both clearly. People can't, he said quietly. Most people haven't spent 2 years making art about things that weren't supposed to belong together. Ghost of his not-quite smile. She'd come to love it, that word, love, careful and private, kept for herself. She loved the restraint of it. The fact that it meant something precisely because it was rare March arrived, and with it the exhibition opening. Ngozi stood in the gallery among her completed works and received the evening she'd worked 2 years toward. 8 pieces hung now, the companion piece to Hall already in progress. The reviews were good, better than good, but she barely registered them. What she registered was the moment Han Seung-jun walked in at 9:30 and the room's energy shifted. She didn't turn immediately. She was mid-conversation with a collector near the far wall, and she made herself finish the sentence she was in. When she turned, he was already looking at the newest piece. Not at her, at the work. And he was standing with the quality of stillness that meant he was genuinely inside something, not observing it but receiving it. She excused herself, crossed the room, stood beside him. The piece was called Remnant. She'd finished it in 6 days, or rather across 6 sleepless days that functioned like one extended night, when she'd finally understood what she was trying to say, and the understanding had been urgent enough to override everything else. She waited, he said. What happened 6 days ago? She stared at him. What? This piece is different from the others. It's not about two things learning to hold each other. He turned to look at her. It's about choosing something after you've already seen what it costs. Gallery noise continued around them, glasses and conversation, and the soft percussion of a successful opening. None of it was relevant. Yes, she said. What was the cost? 6 days ago had been the morning after the 3-hour conversation. The morning she'd woken up and pressed her hand to her sternum and found that the fear and the wanting existed in the same space, and that she was going to have to make something of that or spend the rest of her residency in careful, self-protective misery. Knowing what I was walking into, she said, and deciding it was worth it. He went very still. Is it? He asked. Lo, the party around them ceased to exist. She looked at him, this controlled, dangerous, quietly extraordinary man who'd asked about a fermentation technique and handwritten "if you want" at the bottom of a reservation card, and stood when she left rooms and was currently looking at her with something very close to the surface. Ask me something easier, she said. I can't, he said. I need to know. Then yes, she said. It is. Quality of stillness that passed through him then was different from his usual stillness. This one followed something released, a breath held too long, finally let go. He turned back to the piece, stood close enough that their arms nearly touched. I want to acquire it, he said. It's not for sale. A beat. No, I made it for me. She paused. But I'll tell you what it means sometime if you want. I want, he said. Outside, it had started to snow. The threat escalated on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the opening. She was leaving the gallery at 9 in the evening when someone fell into step behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She developed a calibrated awareness, not paranoia but attention. But when the footsteps held at exactly the same interval through 2 corners and a direction change, she pulled her phone. Someone's following me. Near the gallery. His response came in 11 seconds. Walk toward Insadong Main Street. Don't stop. Kim is 2 minutes from you. Kim appeared at the corner in exactly 2 minutes. He fell into step beside her with the ease of someone joining a planned walk, said quietly. The man behind you is named Lee Jongpil. He's been identified as working for Min Chialsu. Keep walking, and guided her to a car she hadn't seen parked at the curb. In the car, she sent a second text. Park Sungjin again, it's connected. Are you okay? She looked out the window at Seoul passing. Her hands were steady. This surprised her, the steadiness. 18 months ago, on the first day a package from Park Sungjin appeared outside her door, she'd shaken for 2 hours. Now there was something else alongside the fear. A specific clarity. I'm okay. I need to see you tonight. I'm already on my way. He arrived 20 minutes later and the briefing was not a comfortable one. Park Sungjin had grown impatient with the discouragement, had begun operating through intermediaries. Min Chialsu hired people. Those people operated at a remove, creating plausible distance. He was building something, a surveillance picture, a pattern of her movements. What's the pattern for? She asked. An opportunity. He paused. I don't want to theorize about what kind until I have more. She sat on the edge of her couch, processing, hands folded in her lap. Then, what are you going to do? Move against Min Chialsu directly, remove his resources. He crouched in front of her, an extraordinary gesture from a man of his presence, bringing himself to her eye level. I'm also going to suggest something, and I need you to hear it as a suggestion, not a decision I've made. She waited. Move into the penthouse, temporarily, until this is resolved. His eyes held hers. Your own space, people at the building around the clock. You'd be considerably less exposed. She turned it over. She was not a woman who needed rescuing. She'd built her entire adult life on the specific competence of navigating things herself, language barriers, and funding shortfalls and gallery politics, and the grinding exhaustion of being black and female in spaces that hadn't fully prepared for her. She'd navigated those things and produced work she was proud of and made a home in a city not hers by birth. She was also not a woman who confused pride with stupidity. I have conditions, she said. Name them. My studio access stays exactly as it is. I come and go without escort unless the threat level requires otherwise, and we agree on that threshold together. You don't determine it for me unilaterally. Agreed. I keep my own schedule. I communicate my movements for safety, but that communication goes both ways. You tell me if something changes. No comfortable ignorance. Agreed. When this is resolved, she held his gaze. We have an honest conversation about what comes next. Not the crisis structure, the real conversation. Agreed, he said, and then barely above a breath. I want that conversation. She looked at him, crouched in front of her so she wouldn't have to look up at him for something this important. "'Kay," she said. "I'll pack a bag." The penthouse stopped her breath when she walked in. She'd built a picture of it based on everything she knew about him, controlled, minimal, functional. What it actually was, what caught her at the threshold, was full of light. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, soul spreading in every direction. And on the walls, art. Real art, not investment pieces. Works by living Korean artists she recognized. A small sculpture she'd seen at a Busan gallery show. And through the open study door, visible on the wall, a framed photograph, her work. Hall photographed at the preview, filling the frame. Not a print, a photograph. Personal. Done before the commission, before anything. When did you take this? She asked. He came to stand beside her in the doorway. At the preview. Before we'd said more than 4 sentences. She looked at the photograph, looked at him. You're a very strange man, Han Seung-jun, been told. I mean it as a compliment. I know. The first surprise arrived on night 3. She came out of the guest room at 2 in the morning for water and found him standing at the kitchen counter in the dark, reading documents, completely dressed. apparently unaware that sleeping was an option available to him. "You haven't slept," she said. He looked up, did the quick recalibration of someone adjusting to an unexpected presence. "I sleep late." "How late?" "Around 4. A pause. "Usually." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was dark except for Seoul's blue-gold overflow through the windows, the city refusing to be dark even in the middle of the night. "Is this normal for you?" she said. "Or is something wrong?" Beat. "There's a decision I need to make by morning. About 2 men in Ryu D1's network who may not have known what they were facilitating. I'm deciding what to do about them." She sat down at the counter. "Tell me." He turned to look at her fully. "Ngozi, it's 2 in the morning. Tell me," she said again. "Not because I can solve it, because you've been standing alone in the dark with it for hours." Something crossed his face. The expression of a man who has been alone with things for so long that an offer of company feels like a foreign language he knows only theoretically. He told her. She listened. She asked 3 questions, not strategic, just the questions of someone who wanted to understand, and somewhere in the answering she watched him reach his decision. Saw the moment it arrived in his face. "You already knew," she said. "I needed to say it out loud first." He looked at her across the counter. "I haven't had anyone to say things to. 11 years? Longer." She held that, the weight of it. 11 years of decisions made in dark kitchens at 2 in the morning with only the city for company. "Well," she said, "I'm a terrible sleeper too." His mouth moved, not quite a smile, closer than usual. "You're not a terrible sleeper. You were asleep before 11. I woke up. Because of me. Because I sensed something in the penthouse was unresolved," she said, perfectly straight, and watched the not-quite-smile become something more. Something that rearranged his face in a way she was beginning to suspect she would never fully get used to, and never want tonight 7. She was at the loom at 11. It had arrived 3 days earlier, carried up by Kim with the careful neutrality of a man pretending not to notice his employer's life reorganizing itself around a woman, when she heard Seunjun come in. Heard him stop in the hallway outside the study. The pause that meant he was registering her presence. He appeared in the doorway, coat still on, looking at her the way he'd looked at Remnant at the opening. "Stuck," he said. She turned. "How do you know the difference? When you're working, you're in motion. When you're stuck, you're very still and your hands are on the loom, but they're not moving." He came in, sat in the armchair. "What's wrong with it?" "The weft isn't doing what I want in the upper section. I know what the answer is, but my hands haven't figured out how to execute it yet." He nodded, said nothing further. Didn't offer advice, didn't hover, didn't perform the presence of a supportive partner. He simply sat and was quiet and was there. She worked for 40 minutes. Somewhere in the middle of those 40 minutes, her hands found what they'd been looking for. "There," she said to no one. "There," he agreed quietly from the armchair, and she turned and he was watching her hands with complete attention, like her hands solving a problem was one of the more compelling things he'd recently observed. "Been watching me work for 40 minutes, she said. "Yes." Considered. "Because watching you think with your hands is the most honest thing I've seen in a long time. You can't perform it, it's just real." She looked at him for a moment. "Han Seunjun," she said. "Yes. You just described what I find most compelling about watching you work too. When you're making decisions, the calls, the assessments, you can't perform it either. It's just accurate." His face went through something. She watched it happen, the recognition moving through him like weather, layers of it. He got up. Crossed to the loom, crouched beside her, not in front, beside, so they were at the same level, and looked at what she was working on. "What does it mean?" he asked. "The companion piece. The warp is the structure." She spread her hands over the loom. "Fixed. You can't change it once it's set, it determines everything that follows. But the weft," she held up the shuttle. "The weft goes through and over and under, and the pattern lives there. The color, the meaning." He was watching her hands. "The warp is who you're built to be," she said. "The weft is every choice you make inside of that." Very quiet. Then, "I was built to be something that isn't this," she said. "You were made something by circumstance and necessity and 11 years of choosing survival over everything else. That's not the same as being built." He looked at her. In the lamplight, in the late-night quiet, something in his face was very close to the surface. "Been working toward an exit," he said. "From the operational side. 4 years of building toward it. It's not something I can do in 6 months, but it's something I'm doing." She searched his face. "Is that because of me?" It was already happening. He held her gaze. "You're the reason I want to get there faster." She was quiet. He reached out and handed the shuttle back to her. His fingers brushed hers in the handoff, and neither of them moved away from the contact. She kissed him first this time. Soft, then less soft, then with the honest abandon of someone who has spent weeks deciding whether to do this and has finally run out of reasons not to. His arms came around her, and the city existed 20 floors below, and the companion piece sat unfinished on the loom, and the night expanded around them until it was the only thing with any real dimensions. Later, the city beginning to lighten at the edges toward dawn, they lay in the quiet of people who have said something with their bodies they haven't entirely found words for. She could feel his heartbeat under her hand, slower now, steadier. "Ngozi," he said. "Do the thing where you say something I have to process for a week." Chest under her hand moved. A breath that was also a laugh, rare, involuntary, entirely real. "I was going to ask if you're hungry." She lifted her head. "Oh. I can do the other thing too." She looked at him in the almost dawn. "Tell me what the other thing is." He met her eyes and held them. "That I've been alive for 34 years. And for approximately 20 of those years, I've been quite good at making sure nothing got past a certain point." He paused. "You're past it. I don't know when. I don't know how to be careful about it." She was quiet. "Then don't be." "Seungjun." She held his gaze. "Don't be careful about it." Something in his face opened completely, without reserve. She'd seen him controlled, almost smiling, quietly furious, carefully honest. She had not seen this. All the walls entirely down, nothing between her and whatever was underneath. He pulled her closer. She let him. The dawn arrived pink and gray over Seoul, and neither of them slept. The crisis arrived on a Thursday. She was photographing finished panels in the gallery when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. "MS, a woman's voice, low, urgent. "My name is Choi Soo-yeon. I'm a reporter with Insight Seoul. I need to speak with you about Han Seungjun." Ngozi went very still. "How did you get this number?" "I've been investigating the Han organization for 14 months. A pause. "I'm not calling to trap you. I'm calling because you're connected to him, which means you may be in danger you don't fully understand." "What kind of danger?" "Park Sung-jin isn't just a man with a grudge. He's been working with someone inside the Han organization, someone feeding him information, someone who would benefit if Han Seungjun became distracted or damaged by scandal." "Who?" A beat. "Second in command, Ryu D1. We have his communications." Ngozi sat down on the floor of the gallery among her finished panels and let that land, Ryu D1. She'd met him once briefly in Seungjun's offices, compact, quiet, giving her an assessment her instincts had flagged and she dismissed because she'd had no reason at the time to trust the flag. 7 years with Seungjun, from the beginning of the rebuild. "Send me what you have," she said. Her voice was steady. She had no idea how. "I'll verify it, then I'll decide what to do." "As I want to publish." "Send me what you have first. If it's real, I'll help you tell the right story, but I need to see it." A pause, then "I'll send it within the hour." She hung up, sat on the gallery floor for 30 seconds, then she opened her text thread with Han Seungjun. "We need to talk, not by text. Can you come to the gallery? I'm in a meeting." 1 hour, she typed. "It's important." 3 seconds. 20 minutes, he arrived in 18 minutes. She met him at the side door with her phone in her hand and the reporter's preliminary files already forwarded to her email, and she said without softening it, "Someone inside your organization is working with Park Sung-jin. I have documentation. I need you to look at it." She watched the quality of him change. Not his expression that stayed controlled. Something deeper. An interior shift she felt rather than saw, like a pressure change in a closed room. "Show me," he said. She showed him. He scrolled through the files in the storage room of the gallery, back against the wall, face doing the controlled fury thing while he read. Communications between Ryu D1 and Min Chialsu. Through Min Chialsu, back to Park Sung-jin. Operational details, her schedule, her movements, her gallery appearances, passed upward through a chain that ended, each time with Park Sung-jin. When he reached the earliest dated communication, he stopped scrolling. The date was 2 weeks before Club Obsidian. She watched him see it, the full shape of it landing. Ryu D1 had been feeding Park Sung-jin information about her before the night she'd walked across the club and put her lips to Han Seungjun's ear. The stalking, the surveillance, the calculated escalation, all of it had been running parallel to Ryu D1's larger play. If Park Sung-jin could create a crisis around Ngozi, Seungjun would be distracted. If the crisis became a scandal, Seungjun's position would be compromised, and Ryu D1, 7 years patient, would be positioned to move. "How did you get this?" Seungjun asked. A reporter named Choi Soo-yeon, 14 months of investigation. Ngozi held his gaze. "She wants to publish." "When?" "I told her to give me time to verify and make a decision." She paused. "This is where the honest conversation becomes important." He put the phone down, looked at her. In his eyes was the specific quality of a man whose carefully constructed world has revealed a fault line he didn't account for, deciding in real time how to stand on uneven ground. D1, he said. The name came out flat and cold in a way that told her everything about 7 years of what he'd believed was loyalty. He's been with me since the beginning of what you rebuilt, she said. I know. His jaw moved. I need to verify this independently before. I know that too. She stepped toward him, close. I'm not asking you to move without certainty. I'm giving you what I know so that you have it, because that's what we agreed to. He looked at her in the storage room of an Insadong gallery, surrounded by textile panels and the smell of linen, and something in his face did the thing she'd come to watch for. The thing where he was experiencing something he didn't immediately have language for. There's a reporter with 14 months of documentation who is going to publish something, she said. The question is whether we help her publish the right thing, or whether we let her publish whatever she has. He went very still. What do you mean? She has evidence of Ryu D1's betrayal. She may also have collateral documentation about the organization. If she publishes everything, the story becomes Han Seung-jun's criminal network. But if you cooperate selectively, carefully, the story becomes Han Seung-jun was betrayed by a lieutenant working with a stalker to destabilize him. Those are two very different headlines. He stared at her. Thinking strategically, he said. Someone has to. Moment of that extraordinary stillness. Then his hand came up and covered hers where it rested at her side, and he held it there, not pulling her in, not claiming, just holding, like an anchor. But we do it together, she said. I'm not a shield. I'm a partner in figuring this out. Those are two different things, he said. They are. What happened next happened fast, the way things do when multiple forces that have been building simultaneously arrive at their collision point. Seung-jun spent the following 24 hours in a controlled, deliberate fury that expressed itself not through raised voices or physical aggression, but through the surgical precision of a man dismantling something he'd trusted for 7 years. He pulled Ryu D1's access to operational systems. Had Kim and Jiang place eyes on D1's movements without D1's knowledge. Verified every communication in the files through 3 independent channels. Every verification came back clean. Every piece was real. By the following evening, he knew the complete shape of it. Ryu D1 had been running a secondary operation behind the facade of the legitimate holdings for 3 years, using the logistics infrastructure to move goods that violated every line Seung-jun had drawn. Feeding Park Sung-jin information about Ngozi as a distraction mechanism. Positioning himself, patiently, for a lateral move when Seung-jun's position was compromised enough. It was well constructed. 7 years of patience. It also required Seung-jun to have something personal to protect, something that mattered enough to distract him. Ryu D1 had gambled that Ngozi was that thing. He'd been right. He'd fatally miscalculated what she'd do with the information when she got it. Ngozi was at the penthouse when Seung-jun returned from the confrontation with D1. She heard the elevator, heard his footsteps, looked up from the loom. He came in and sat in the armchair across from her and said nothing. She let the silence hold for a moment, read its texture, not explosive, heavy, like something has been carried very far. Done, she asked. Done. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He admitted to everything, the operation, the park connection, all of it. His jaw worked. 7 years. I know. I trusted him with. He stopped. The sentence went somewhere private. I don't do trust easily. I did it with him because he was there from the beginning. When I rebuilt everything, he was the first person who said yes. She set down the shuttle, crossed the room, sat on the coffee table in front of him, close enough that their knees nearly touched, a position she'd occupied before during hard conversations, and which he'd learned to read as I'm here, I'm staying, say what you need to say. Reporter, he said. I spoke to her yesterday. I told her we'd cooperate with the Ryu D1 story specifically, his activities, his betrayal, his connection to Park Sung-jin. In exchange, she agreed to distinguish between that story and anything about the broader organizational structure. She paused. It's not a clean deal. She's a journalist and she has her own ethics, but she said the betrayal story is the real story and she'd rather tell it accurately. He was quiet for a long moment. You negotiated with a journalist on my behalf. On our behalf, she said. This was affecting me too. He looked at her, this specific, steady look she'd come to understand as him experiencing something he didn't have immediate language for. Never, He stopped, started again. The people around me spend a great deal of energy managing what happens to me, protecting my position. No one has ever walked toward the problem and started negotiating. The problem wasn't going to disappear, she said simply. No. He reached out and took her hand, turned it palm up in both of his. Looked at the indigo still faintly under her nails from 2 days' work. Ngozi, I need to tell you something. Me. Park Sung-jin is being handled through every legal mechanism available plus several that aren't legally codified but will result in him having significantly fewer resources and allies than he had last week. The evidence his intermediaries generated while surveilling you has been redirected to a prosecutor, I trust. It will be used. A pause. The other 2 women, the ones whose cases were redirected 4 years ago, they'll find, through channels they can't entirely trace, that those cases are being reopened. She looked at him carefully. You did that. For your position, not for strategy. He held her gaze. No, she was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you. Don't thank me, he said. It should have happened when they first reported. The fact that it didn't is, he stopped. That's the thing I carry. The places where my world and that world overlap in ways that cost people who have nothing to do with either of us. She squeezed his hands. I know. I'm not asking you to make peace with it. I'm not at peace with it, she said. But I'm here, and you're working toward the exit, and those are 2 separate true things that can coexist. She held his gaze. We figure it out. The Insight Seoul article ran on a Friday. Betrayal from within. How a stalking ring was dismantled when its operator's own lieutenant turned witness. Choi Soo-yeon's byline. Park Sung-jin, Min Cheol-soo, and Ryu D-won named specifically. Detailed, precise, sourced with the care of 14 months of journalism. Han Seung-jun's name appeared once, in the final paragraph, as the business target against whom the destabilization plot had been aimed. The thinnest and most careful version of the truth. Choi Soo-yeon had stood by it because the real story was accurate, and it was enough. Park Sung-jin's family issued a statement through lawyers. His social access narrowed considerably in the following 2 weeks. The 2 women whose cases had been redirected found, through channels they couldn't trace, that someone had taken an interest. Ngozi read about the reopened cases on a Monday morning at the penthouse kitchen counter with coffee and her phone, and felt something clean and straightforward move through her. A relief that had nothing to do with Han Seung-jun and everything to do with 2 women who'd tried to report and been dismissed. She thought about the white glove, about 3 weeks of quiet, accumulating dread, about a gold dress and 30 seconds and a decision. She put her phone down and looked at Seoul in the morning. Okay, she thought. Just that. Okay, Yemi arrived 3 weeks later with one rolling suitcase, strong opinions, and a screenshot she'd been saving for the right moment. She pulled it up before Ngozi had even closed the apartment door behind her. Explain this to me, she said, holding out her phone. It was a photo, published in a lifestyle section Ngozi didn't follow, taken at the March exhibition opening. Han Seung-jun, standing in front of Remnant, not looking at the camera, not performing anything. Just looking at the piece with an expression the photographer had somehow caught in the fraction of a second before he'd have controlled it. The face of a man being undone by something and knowing it. He doesn't know that photo exists, Ngozi said. I gathered. Yemi put the phone away. So, the most dangerous man in Seoul. We're not doing that. We're absolutely doing that. Sit down. They did it for 2 hours, the real version, not the sanitized one. Ngozi told her about Park Sung-jin, the white glove, the reporter, Ryu D-won's betrayal, the negotiations she'd handled while Seung-jun was verifying intelligence, the study with 2 desks, the jollof rice research from a recipe she'd mentioned once, the loom that had migrated to the penthouse without anyone officially authorizing it. Yemi listened. Which was its own remarkable thing. Yemi, who had an opinion ready before most people finished their sentences, listened to all of it. When Ngozi finished, Yemi was quiet for a long moment. You negotiated with a journalist, she said. Yes, you verified intelligence. You told him, this man who has 300 people, that he couldn't make decisions on your behalf. He listened. He's still learning. But yes. Another silence. Then Yemi said, I need to meet him tonight, not because I'm deciding anything you've clearly decided. But I've spent 18 months worried about you being alone in this city, and I need to see this with my own eyes. He's coming for dinner. Yemi stood and smoothed her dress. Good, I have questions. What Ngozi didn't know was that Seung-jun had been preparing for exactly this, not the performance of preparation. The real kind. He arrived with groceries rather than a reservation. He cooked in Ngozi's kitchen while she sat at the counter, and Yemi watched from the doorway with an expression she was working to keep neutral. He made jollof rice, the version he'd been refining across 3 months of incremental adjustment, cross-referencing restaurants Ngozi had taken him to, asking her grandmother questions through the translation layer of a video call Ngozi's mother had facilitated without entirely understanding why her daughter's serious Korean boyfriend needed to know the specific ratio of tomato to pepper. Yemi noticed the correctness of the rice the moment the lid came off the pot. "How did you?" she started. "Her grandmother's method," Seungjun said, without turning from the stove. "The fermentation step was the last thing I got right." Yemi looked at Ngozi. Ngozi looked at her plate. The dinner was quiet in the way that dinners are quiet when 3 people are all paying careful attention to each other. Yemi asked 2 questions that were not technically aggressive, but contained within them the architecture of a woman who wants to know if you will hurt her person. The first, what happens to her if things go wrong in your world? Seungjun put down his chopsticks, looked at Yemi directly. "She's protected regardless of what happens to me. Financially, physically, legally. That structure is already in place. It doesn't depend on our relationship continuing." Yemi's expression shifted. She hadn't expected that answer. She'd expected reassurance or deflection, not an answer that told her the planning had already been done. "Does she know about that structure?" Yemi asked. "She helped design it," he said. The second question arrived near the end of dinner without warning. "Do you know what she gave up to stay here?" Seungjun looked at Ngozi briefly, then back at Yemi. "Her community, the ease of being fully understood without translation, the particular comfort of a place that already knows you." He paused. "The things that are hardest to carry across distance because they don't travel in suitcases." Table was very quiet. Yemi picked up her glass. Put it down without drinking. Looked at Ngozi. "Okay," she said. Just that, but in Yemi's language, in that specific register, it meant, "I see it, I believe it, you have my blessing, and if he hurts you, I will find a way to make him regret it that has nothing to do with whatever power he thinks he has." Seungjun appeared to understand all of this. He inclined his head. The acknowledgement of a man who respects precision. Later, when he'd gone and Yemi was on the couch with her shoes off, she said, "The rice was right." "I know," knew the fermentation step. "I know," Yemi turned. "Your grandmother is going to love him." Ngozi laughed, full and helpless, rising from somewhere that had been careful for a long time. "She's going to terrorize him." "That," Yemi agreed. "He'll survive it." Thing was, Ngozi already knew he would. April came. The March exhibition closed. The companion piece was delivered, by Ngozi herself, Kim following at a discreet distance, to the penthouse, where she spent 3 hours determining the correct wall while Seungjun stood with his arms folded, his entire bearing communicating that he would wait for as long as this required, and considered this a perfectly reasonable expenditure of time. When it was hung, they both stepped back. Hall was in the gallery, owned by a collector who'd come to the opening and wept quietly in the corner. The companion piece was called Return, same warp, different weft. The structure identical, the pattern transformed by every choice made through it. Same blue, but warmer. Same geometric precision, but in places deliberately interrupted, where the weft departed from the plan and did something unexpected, and the departure was beautiful. "This is different from what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He considered. "Something more symmetrical." Symmetry is for things that have never been lived in. She looked at the piece. "This is what things look like when they're real. The structure holds and the pattern changes. That's not a failure of the structure, it's the point of it." He was quiet beside her. "Ngozi," she turned. He was facing her now, not the textile, and his expression was the fully open one, every layer down, nothing between her and whatever lived underneath all that controlled precision. "Have something to ask you," he said. "I know," he blinked. "You know? You've been building toward it for 10 days. You reorganized the study so there's a second desk, and you didn't say anything about it. You had Minjai mention an extended residency opportunity that would keep me in Seoul for another year." She tilted her head. "You've been making the infrastructure for asking me something." His jaw moved. "I will never fully adapt to how observant you are." "Good. It'll keep you honest." She held his gaze. "Ask me." He took a breath. This man who moved through the world with the certainty of someone for whom unsteadiness was existential took a visible, genuine breath. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because of the danger, which is managed. Not because of the commission, which is finished. Because the infrastructure of my life has rearranged itself around you in ways I neither planned nor want to reverse. He paused. I know I'm not simple. I know what staying looks like, and I won't pretend otherwise. I know you have your own path, your work, your residency, the career you've built, and I would not ask you to dissolve that into me. I want to build something that holds both. Another pause, smaller. With you, if you want that. Study was quiet. Seoul in April beyond the windows, cherry blossoms visible at the park's edges, the afternoon doing things to the skyline she'd been meaning to photograph for weeks. She thought about a gold dress and 30 seconds and the most dangerous-looking man in the room. She thought about if you want handwritten at the bottom of a reservation card, the fermentation step, the 2 desks, the photograph of Hall that had been on his wall before he had any reason to put it there. She thought about her grandmother's hands moving over cloth, about making connections across distances that had no business being bridged. Yes, she said. I want that. Breath he released was so complete, so entirely unguarded, that it nearly undid her. He crossed to her, cupped her face in both hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with the care of someone touching something they've been afraid to take for granted, rested his forehead against hers. I need to tell you something else, he said, against her face. Tell me. Spent 11 years being efficient with language, saying what I mean and nothing I don't. He breathed. I love you. I don't know when it happened. I know it happened before I had any reasonable basis for it, and I've been, another breath, afraid of that. Because the things I love have not historically been safe. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were dark and direct and completely unguarded, and she thought she'd never in her life seen anyone look at her quite this way, like she was both the terrifying thing and the only shelter from it simultaneously. Things you love, she said quietly, are safer when they know what's coming and choose it anyway. You're choosing it. I have been choosing it, she said, since I walked across a room and whispered in the ear of the most dangerous man in Seoul. Something moved through his face, the full, rearranging thing, armored down entirely, and then his arms came around her completely. She let herself be held, which was its own kind of choice, the one that required the most of her because it required trust, and trust was the bravest possible expenditure of herself. Love you too, she said, into the warmth of his shoulder. Complicated and real and with full knowledge of what you are. All of it. His hold tightened. Fractionally. Enough they got married in October in Jeju, which Ngozi chose because the light in October on Jeju was a particular shade of gold she'd spent 3 weekends trying to capture in textiles and had decided she'd rather just stand inside. Small by choice, by mutual agreement reached without significant negotiation, because they were, as it turned out, people who wanted the same kind of small, real things despite every appearance to the contrary. Yemi was there. Minjai was there. Kim and Jeong were there in suits, and Kim cried, which he would deny until the end of his life. A small number of people who mattered, in the Jeju afternoon, with the ocean visible at the edge of the garden and the autumn something else entirely. Deeper, darker, more honest than spring. She wore ivory, not white. A dress she'd woven herself, which had taken 4 months and contained, in the warp, 3 threads of the same blue from Hall. Not visible exactly. Present. Structural, he wore charcoal. She'd told him this was a predictable choice, and he'd produced the flattest expression she'd ever seen on a human face, which had made her laugh so hard she had to put down her tea, which had made his flat expression crack into something that rewrote her understanding of what his face could do. When it was done, when the words had been said and the small gathering around them had reacted with the specific emotional enthusiasm of people watching something they've been waiting to see, she turned to him and he was already looking at her with that expression. The open one, the fully down one. Han Seunjun, she said. Ngozi, he said, she laughed. The sound went out into the October air, and the ocean received it, and the afternoon light did what the Jeju afternoon light does, that particular gold. And it was nothing like what either of them had planned for their lives, and it was exactly what both of them had, in different ways, been working toward for longer than they could trace 3 months after the wedding. She was in the study of the penthouse, her desk fully established opposite his, her loom in the corner, her grandmother's photograph pinned above her work table, her books colonizing an entire shelf. When she looked at the test in her hands for a long moment, she thought about the warp, the structure, the thing you set and cannot chain, that determines everything following. She thought about the weft, the choices, the color, the pattern. The way beauty lives not in the structure alone, but in what moves through it. She put the test on his desk, said nothing, went back to her work. He came in an hour later, sat down, and saw it. The sound he made was not a word. It was something before language, involuntary and entirely real, coming from the place she'd been slowly, carefully reaching for months. The place in Han Seung-jun that had been sealed for 11 years against exactly this kind of opening. She looked up from the loom. He was looking at the test, then at her. His face, the open one, the armor-down one, was more open than she'd seen it yet. Like a door opened from both sides simultaneously. He said, just that. Yes, she said. He crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched in front of her the way he had months ago in her apartment, bringing himself to her eye level for something that mattered. His hands came to her face. His eyes were doing something that had no name in any of the languages between them. Ngozi, he said. The word that wasn't just her name anymore. I know, she said. I know! His forehead came to rest against hers. The penthouse was quiet around them. The city moved below. Return hung on the study wall above their heads, its weft departing from the plan in the exact places that were most beautiful, the structure holding, the pattern changed by every choice made through it. Somewhere in Seoul, 2 reopened cases were moving through a legal system that was finally going to produce an outcome for the women who deserved 1 year ago. Somewhere. Ryu D1 was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for arrangements he didn't love. Somewhere, Han Seung-jun's organization was moving slowly, carefully, 4 months further along toward an exit that was taking years but was real. She held to that. She'd verified it with her own watching and would continue to. And here, a study above the Han River, 2 desks, a loom, books that had migrated, belongings that had merged. A life built incrementally and honestly from a single desperate moment in a marble-floored club when a woman in a gold dress had assessed the room, assessed the risk, made a decision and walked across the distance. Please, just pretend you know me. He had not pretended. That was the thing she understood most clearly, looking back. He'd put his hand on her back and made it look real, but what had made it look real was that it already was. Something in Han Seung-jun had recognized her before either of them had reason to use that word, had responded immediately and without permission to the specific frequency of who she was. He had not pretended. He had simply, quietly begun to know her, and she had known him back. All of him, the difficult and the controlled and the slowly opening, and the man who cooked her grandmother's recipe and crouched at eye level when things were important and stood up when she left rooms and said her name like it was the only accurate word in any language he'd ever spoken. All of it. Her choice. Her eyes open. She put her hand over his where it rested against her face. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning, enormous and intricate, full of the kind of beauty that reveals itself only to those willing to stay long enough to learn its language. The Han River caught the light the way it always did. The cherry trees in the park below stood bare, waiting for spring, the branches holding their patience. Everything was exactly what it was. Nothing was pretend. Thank you so much for watching, besties. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please like, share, and subscribe to Black in Korea Stories. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.